video is brought to you by Letsynthesize Academy, the #1 place for practice-oriented courses for serious music producers.
Hey, Dan Larson here, welcome to the newest Synthesize Sunday episode, and today I want to talk about how to make sub or low end through this little thing I made like 1,000 years ago. Like always, if you want to download this whole project, check my Patreon, and if you want to dig deeper into production, check my academy for full start to finish courses. People love it, but right now, let's jump into it. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 different methods how to mix subs. But first, before I jump into it, I'm going to tell you the most important thing, at least for me, the most important thing you need to know about while mixing or creating subs. So here is the first method I'm going to use for that. And as you can see, I have a separate sub track and I have the drums, stuff like that, really heavy. Now, obviously, if you use very heavy drums like this one here, especially with the kick and the snare, they are very punchy, very heavy. You probably don't want to use just a simple sound wave because that will never cut through the mix the way you want it to do. So this is why I used a sub that is heavily distorted. And in operator, if you click on the filter, you can see the shaper. I choose the hard. And it is so heavy that I already had to use a separate filter to just basically cut the unwanted harmonies that it created. Because this is just too much, obviously. You don't want to have all these harmonics. So I made a cut at around 700 Hz. You can go lower or higher if you want, but for me, 700 Hz sounded well with the basses. Let me show them. So if I go higher, I don't know, for me it's just too artificial. I don't want to hear all of those harmonics on the mid and the mid bass area. So I think this type of filtering on the sub is enough at the moment. But if I use a different type of drums, like let's say this kick, obviously the sub with that would not feel really well with the drums. Now the snare is still very heavy, so let's say, as you can hear, this sub, the harmonics of this sub is just too much for this type of drum. So let me pull back the shaper. Yeah, it fits so better, a lot better to this type of drums. Now this is the main thing, to basically match the harmonies that you create with your sub with the drums. So let me redo them. And once you have it, obviously you want to have a hard sidechain because you don't want to ruin the phases of your kick drum with the sub. Let me demonstrate it. If I resample the sub and the drums all together, you can see that the phase is aligning pretty well. So you don't really see where the kick ends and where the sub starts. Well, you can tell it by the frequency, but not because it has some weird cuts or weird phase issues. And that is the thing that you want to do here, really. So if you want a tight mixdown and if you want to have a loud and tight mixdown, this is really something you need to keep in mind. Make a very precise sidechain on your sub. And this is what I did here, using the utility tool. And this is, this is cool because I can see how much I want to subtract or how much I want to kill from the sub. So honestly, I like this method a lot better than using an automated sidechain VST or whatever, because I can see what I do if I go and, see the automations. Maybe it's a little more work, but I like to see what I do, not only hear that. I see several methods of how to, mix the low end of your songs with the sub and etc. Because what the low end contains is basically the sub, the drums, well, the kick drum and sometimes the snare, and your own mid basses too. So these are the 3 instruments that you really need to take care about. And the first method is just simply use one boss, just route everything to it, put some effects, compression and a limiter to the end, and boom, you are done. This is what I did here. Everything goes directly into this bus. So this is all I did here. Some slight compression and a limiter. And in most of the cases, this works really well. It doesn't matter if you make dubstep or drum bass, whatever, this in most of the cases work well. If you want to go a little more in depth, you probably want to use a separate bus for the low end only. So this is what I did here. I separated the kick and the snare, and I routed them into the low end buses, as you can see here, and the sub into this bus. And what I did is I applied a compression, a saturation to catch basically the transients, and some EQ because, you know, compression always pulls back the low end of your signal. So this is what I try to give back, and the limiter to the end with some extra gain. I try to match the output gain of the low end to the previous version that I did here, or previous mix. And altogether they sound like this. For me it sounds just fine as the previous one. Let's try to see and not only hear what we're doing. So let me record a short phrase from this. Okay, let's see the previous one. So if I put these next to each other, honestly, I don't really see too much of a difference. Maybe the sub is it is compressed a little more obviously because we compressed the kick and the sub. But always be careful with the compression. You don't want to go very crazy with the compression, and never try to use multi-band compression on subs. Okay, this is very, very important. So this is one routing. So you take the kick, maybe the snare and the sub into one bus, compress it a little, not too heavily, and this is all. And the next method that I see guys doing is method 3, is when they took the sub and the mid basses, because they basically correspond to each other. They make the full bass line basically of the song. So this is why I took the sub, I routed it into bass bus, and the mid basses are going into bass bus. This is the bass bus, and the same thing, I use some compression on it, and altogether they go into the main bus. Okay, so this is how they sound all together. It is clipping heavily, so what I would do is just add a limiter. Or if you want, you can add a saturator instead, but be careful, you don't want to oversaturate your sub. Yeah, this is what is happening here, so I think the limiter is a better idea. Or if you have L2 in plugins, you know, FabFilter L2, that might be another solution. So these guys go into bus. And let's see if we resample this too. The sub looks like compressed a lot heavily, or a lot heavier than our previous one, the first method. You can see some volume differences here and there on the sub. What I don't really like here is the too much compression on the basses. And if you, for example, kill the sub or just mute the sub at some of the bass shots, you can have some serious problems. Because the bass bus compression will bring up the mid basses, and you will hear a huge volume bump on the mid basses if you know, deactivate or mute one of the sub notes. So this is what you can see or hear here. It's not too drastic because I didn't drive the compressor very heavily, but if you do, and if you overcompress your sound with this method, you can experience some problems. So I don't really like this method, I would say. And honestly, I don't really like the second method, because it is basically the same. You compress the snare and the kick with the sub, and sometimes it just distorts the snare. Let me show it to you. If I only resample the low end bass, I think I don't need to resample it. You can already hear that the snare is a little distorting. So this is why, for me, the first one is the best method. This is my favorite one. This is how I mix the low end of my songs or of my works. The main thing is, if it sounds well, it's cool. Okay, so once again, if you want to download this project, check my Patreon with tons of other stuff, and check my academy if you want to dig deeper into production. I was Lars and see you guys next time. Peace!